I would like to call a workshop to order, please. This is a workshop for the beginning of our discussion regarding the 2016-2017 fiscal year budget. Staff will bring us information this evening in regards to the workshop. Workshop is now called to order. Mr. Driggers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. You have in front of you worksheets for our proposed 2016-2017 budget. What you have in front of you is a balanced budget, simply meaning that expenses and revenues are equal. So we are not out of balance in any regard. To give you a little bit of detail of what we'll be taking a look at this evening, as we talk about a balanced budget, it is balanced without us proposing any change in our millage rate. We are currently at 97.8 mills, and this budget would maintain that level. In our special funds under stormwater, we are currently at $21.60 for an ERU, an equivalent residential unit. That rate would stay the same. All fees within our fee structure would stay the same, and we would propose a modification to our fee structure concerning our public services fund relative to the collection of municipal solid waste, and we'll spend a little bit of time talking specifically about that. It is a revenue neutral, expense neutral proposal, but it will have some changes in how that is applied, and we'll spend some time talking about that. Mill value, last year, mill value for us was just about $103,500, just about the halfway point of 103. Collection, we are estimating the collection of a mill this year at 111,000, so we are continuing to recognize growth. We collect about 95% of taxes. So the assessed value would be a little bit higher than that, but the 111 is what we would anticipate the value, the collected value of that mill. As you look through this budget, what you will see is that we are proposing a budget of $22,250,525. That is compared to our adopted budget of last year of $20,605,900. And I want to talk a little more specific about that in the numbers that you'll be seeing. And then the year prior to that at $19,769,005. As you are aware, and we talk about this each year, one of the things that we have to do is we have to encumber our expenses as we move into our new year, and it requires that we make an amended budget for the purposes of what is recorded moving forward. And so as you would look through the budget, you will notice that there is a prior year. There's going to be the budget, and that is the amended budget based on those encumbrances. And then you will also see what we have, where we currently are, and on the revenue side, where we estimate that we'll be finishing. And then you'll see columns that say requested, recommended, and approved. Requested being what came directly from the departments, recommended is what came through the finance department, and approved being that which I am submitting to you. Any modifications, amendments that you would make to the budget would be reflected in that approved column as well. Amended for the year, that budget would be $21,351,303. To give you some idea of what that represents, this year we would be having a 4.21% increase of the prior year budget as amended. 4.21% overall increase in the budget. Last year, we had a 4.23% increase in the budget. So we are right in line with what we accomplished last year to where we are this year. So that's the reason that we have to consider that amended versus adopted. And we can get more into detail with that if there's more questions about that. couple of things that you will find in the budget. We'll talk more specifically when we look at the departments relative to requests that were made for our staffing. But I will refer us back to our transmittal letter of last year, without reading that to you, but to refer back to that, to simply say, you will recall that last year you approved us approving and moving forward with a newly adopted compensation and classification study. That was completely implemented last year, and we made very minimal changes to any of our staffing levels to enable us to do that. The requests this year are more than what we would have normally considered, but we indicated last year that we would need to use this year to do a little bit of catch up with that, and you will see that, and we'll talk again about that specifically as we work through the budget. The good thing is that having that in place, this budget does allow us to implement the step for our employees that they would have relative to their job grade and their job position. They would be eligible based on merit to receive that step as long as their performance is meeting or exceeding expectations. You'll also find in this budget that one of the things that we try to achieve is to allow for a cost of living increase that could occur based on CPI. Well, CPI this year is really at a historical low. His CPI this year is at 0.012. 1/10 of 1% is CPI. In talking with our comp and class consultants, I am recommending to you in this budget that we would consider a CPI of a minimum of 0.25%, 0.25, while CPI is 0.12. I am recommending a 1/4 of 1% salary increase for employees for CPI, and those numbers are reflected in the budget. One of the other things that we've provided for in this budget that we've been trying for a number of years to do is that I am recommending in this budget an incentive for our employees who are residents of the city. So in this budget, there is a 2% premium that is paid to our employees who are residents of the city. It is an incentive for them to live within our municipality. Those employees that are not residents of the city receive no part of that, but those employees who are residents of the city would be eligible for that 2%. That is something that we started. We started that a year or so ago when we were looking at department head hires. You were very supportive of that in that process. It worked really well for us, and I am proposing in this budget that we would do that moving forward with all of our employees as well. So our employees would be eligible for their step. They would be eligible for 0.25% on CPI, and those who live inside the city limits would receive a one-time adjustment that would remain with them as that adjustment as long as they are residents of the city. If they were to move out of the city, that comes off. Somebody who's not in the city moves in the city, they would be eligible for it, is how that would work. And we can talk more specific about that as well. All other components of the budget that have been there in prior years is still there. Very happy to report that there are no changes in cost to our health insurance program. Mr. Seifert, I think we're at year six that we're not needing to fund increases either on the employer side of that or the employee side of that. We're being very, very successful with our management program, our risk management program relative to our health insurance, and those dividends are being recognized by not having the increases that many other organizations are seeing. In this budget, there was $602,021 requested by our departments that you will see in that requested line item, but in the approved line item, up to that amount has been removed. So requested was $22,852,546. I am bringing to you that balanced budget at $22,250,585. I reference that so that you are aware that $602,000 plus has already been cut from this proposed budget before we have brought that to you. That is much of the narrative that we will see this evening. Before I start to take a look at the documents, are there questions relative to our path forward?
Council? Sounds like we're ready to jump in.
Very good. If we get too deep, just stop me at any moment. I don't want to go any deeper than you want us to go. I would like to start with revenue. It should be the top of your sheets. One of the things, obviously, that drives our considerations in the budget is looking at the dollars that we anticipate that we would receive based on our normal operations. This would be... You'll see that as Fund 11. It'll say at the top, General Fund Revenue. The bottom, you'll see, it'll say page 1 of 7 is where we're getting started. Are we all on the same page? Very good. You will see, again, in the second column over, or the very first column is actual for prior year. Again, that second is that budget is amended for encumbrances or transfers. You will see where we are actual year to date, and that is as of today. So anything that was recorded through our system, these reports were printed at 4:38 p.m. today. So anything received and recorded is going to reflect there as well. And then on the revenues, we have estimated what we anticipate will be the year-end, June 30th, total revenues for each of those line items. And then, of course, you will see that truly on revenue, you will notice that requested, recommended, and approved are going to follow the same amount across the board because those are internal calculations that the finance department, Mr. Seifert, and myself are making. The point that I'd like to show, particular to revenue, is that we are extremely conservative in projecting our revenues. You will notice, if you go to the back page and you're looking at that revenue, which would be the $22,250,525, that from the actual of last year to what we budgeted, we were extremely conservative. We only estimated an increase of 0.008. That is virtually no growth. Between what we have budgeted and what we estimate this year to collect is a difference of 0.039. So we are actually seeing growth occur in revenues. And then that, from what we are estimating to collect this year to what we are recommending or we are projecting that we will receive, we're back down to 0.003. So we're extremely conservative in estimating growth for the budget. What we do from years back now, recession going forward, we do not do projections for revenue based on growth patterns. So we're not going to take linear progression or any of those statistical methods. We're going to take what we believe, what we did collect last year, what we believe based on where we are today, that we will finish up on June 30th, and then we are projecting that forward for the next year. Again, projecting that growth in budget at only 0.003, 3/1000th of a percent. So we believe that's what you have instructed us to do, to be extremely conservative in those estimates. It allows us that if we were to have a downturn in our economy, that the downturn would have to be more severe than our revenues were for the prior year, because again, we're not projecting growth in those numbers. So as you look through revenue, you can see that there are some shifts in that which would be under taxes. You can see that under franchise and license, tax being ad valorem taxes, that's our property tax and our vehicle taxes. Franchise and license, that's our local business license. That's going to be all of those receipts that we receive from the municipal association relative to insurance and to telecommunications that they are collecting on our behalf. Most of the other dollars start to become much smaller when we start looking at miscellaneous revenues. But you'll see permits, fines, those types of things, all holding pretty consistent. You'll see some shifts in line items between one or another, but if one goes up, another has gone down. And then and we try really, really hard to make sure that if we are recognizing that we're seeing some shift in a revenue resource, that we are adjusting for that in another place. So again, as you go to page 7 of 7, that difference in the amended budget, $21,351,303 to what we are recommending at $22,450,525. That again is the basis of the budget process. Now, we don't do revenue projections until well after departments have submitted their budgets for consideration, and that is intentional. I would prefer that our departments submit budgets based on what they believe their needs to be. And then I will only go in and make adjustments to those once we have determined what we believe the revenue stream to accurately be for the coming year. And that's why you're seeing that 600,000 plus adjustment. But we don't go to the departments and say, we think this is what your budget should be, bring back the number to make it equal that. We really say to them, tell us what your resource needs are, tell us what's happening, make your argument, and they do that. They will prepare written documents, justification for each and every expenditure that they are recommending. Those are reviewed in the finance department. Susan reviews those first. She makes those entries. From Susan, that goes to David. He does his review. He makes his adjustments and his entries. And then once they've completed that, it'll come to me. I will do my review and I will make my adjustments going forward from there. Every year, we're not always able to bring an absolutely balanced budget. So this year, we're very, very glad to do that. Relative to revenues, are there any items that you're seeing in any of those documents that I or representatives from the finance department can assist you with? Any issue or concern or questions? And of course, this is your first review. When you take this back, you'll have an opportunity to really sit down and spend some time on it. We encourage you to call us. We encourage you to come back at the next meeting. We want to make sure that your questions are answered, whether it's revenue or it's expenditures, whatever that case may be. But at least with your first review, is there anything that's kind of popping out there that you would like for us to address? Okay, I will, and we can go back at any point as well. No problem there.
Mr. Greer, while it's me,
yes, sir.
It's not terribly germane to this conversation. As you well know, we've been involved fairly intricately on the business tax, potential business tax changes at a legislative level. And I've just simply lost track of that. Where are we in Columbia now with any changes relative to the business license fee? Is that not going to happen this year, or do you? It
will not happen this year. Okay. It was not able to move far enough through the legislative process in this legislative year. We believe that it will be reintroduced at the beginning of the next session. That's what we are advised is that will be refiled. David serves on the state committee for that as well. I'm familiar with what's happening on the legislative committee, but do you have any more recent update other than that they intend to refile?
That is for the legislative piece, that's the latest information we have. I just got an email 30 minutes ago, they're requesting that we get together in about 2 weeks. So the municipal association is moving forward with the intent that this will be refiled at the beginning of the next session, and moving forward with the portal. The pieces in that require that all the municipalities move to the same method that we are already on. That piece of it affects us very minimally. So while it affects us, individual businesses moving within our rate structure, the effect of us is minimal in comparison to those two.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah,
wanted an update
at
in that regard.
6.7 million of our total revenue,
Yeah.
that's critically important to us in what the municipal association collects and what we collect locally. That's one of those that any significant changes that could impact local collection of that, then it becomes a pass-through to our residents on ad valorem tax, not on the business license. And that's one of the things that we are just most vocal about, is that in true home rule, this council needs the authority to be able to determine where those resources are collected from, whether that's business or it's property owners or whatever that may be. That is a local decision to be made by the local council.
I was aware that legislation had been stuck in committee or reassigned to committee and probably wasn't going to come back out. Sounds to me like the municipal association is moving ahead with being ready for it if it does come out sometime early next year.
They've just taken the position that says we think we have a good bill, and we would rather promote a good bill than to wait and be defensive on something else that could come out that could be damaging.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, exactly. The next, I would look at us moving through the respective departments of the budget. We would begin on the expense side. You would see in your sheet, the very first one will say 1 of 1, but general fund expenditure, and it's going to say mayor and council, kind of at the very top there, but it's account 410, department 410. And then you'll see pages 1 of 40, 2 of 40, and 3 of 40. That is relative to that which is mayor and council. There are minimal and very modest changes that have been made there. We were prepared last year in the adjustments that were being made relative to compensation. That occurred in a prior fiscal year. So we were prepared for that. No major adjustments that needed to take place there. Most line items are in line, almost dollar for dollar, as they were in the previous year. Total that we're looking there, 217,262, and again, that was compared to adjusted budget for current year, 200,332. So only about a $16,900 shift total from one fiscal year to the next. As you're looking through that, any changes or questions that you may see there? That one was pretty straightforward.
Where'd you get the 200,330?
On your very first page, where it says report totals.
The budget, okay.
Yes, ma'am. The way that the report system works is that at the end of the detail sheets, it doesn't give a total. So we run this total sheet and put it on the very front so that you can see each area within departments as well as the total of the department. So it allows us to see personnel expenses, operating expenses, debt service in that case. Okay. Next, you will see Department 411. That is administration. In 411, you will see couple of line items that would be new. One that I will certainly draw to your attention is on page 4 of 40. You will see an entry for $12,900. That is for our ordinance codification, or a portion of our ordinance codification. Today, our land development, it's land development regs. Everything from planning and zoning, but the ordinances relative to planning and zoning are not codified in our municipal code. They are a separate ordinance. This would allow us to incorporate that into our overall code. It becomes searchable, and it also then allows for that to be reviewed more regularly by legal counsel as well. So we think that that's a good investment. We think it's the appropriate time. Development is an important piece of what we have going on, and we want to make sure that our development community is aware of what those ordinances are, makes it easily searchable and up to date much quicker than we would able to produce that by hand. And so that's the quote that we received for that. A couple of things that we would want to make sure that you are aware of. In the administrative department, we are recommending some staff amendments. And the way that is, and so that you can see where that is coming from. Set it to the side. Right in front of me. The IT department has asked that we consider moving a part-time position to a full-time position. We've evaluated the workflows and the volume of what's taking place in that department. We had budgeted previously part-time and resources for an intern. We believe that moving from that part-time position to a full-time position and removing the intern resources would be more advantageous to us, that we would have better benefit by doing that, and this budget allows us to do that. One of the areas that we have our largest increase in transactions, volume of interaction with customers, is in our first floor lobby. So we are recommending that a position be added there that would be a receptionist, data entry clerk. We believe that a large part of the resources, the funding for that, can be achieved by reducing the hours of 2 of our existing part-time employees, because as that workflow has increased over time, we've simply added more and more hours to those part-time personnel. They are now at a point beyond where they were employed to work. They are beyond where they really wanted to be in a part-time position, as well as we're pushing the threshold on benefits for part-time employees for the amount of hours that they're working as well. So we believe that it's beneficial for us to reduce the hours of 2 of those existing part-time positions and creating one full-time position. Also, within that department, we are recommending that a business license inspector position. We used to have 2 full-time business license inspectors. During the recessionary period, we reduced one of those positions, and our work volume is now at a level that we believe that we've really stretched our resources. I call to your attention that that is a revenue expense neutral position. We will only fund that position when we believe that there is the ability for additional income that position would achieve in finding uncollected business license. So that inspector, we believe that there is enough capacity there, and there is enough work taking place in our community of people operating without a business license, that this business license inspector, their position will generate more revenue than it will cost for the position. The current person that we have is just is beyond capacity. Our work volume is greater than that person can achieve. So we believe that can do that. So that is a revenue neutral, expense neutral position. And so that's what's happening in the administrative budget that you have before you, 411. Any questions relative to 411 that maybe pops off the page?
On that inspector's position, is there any way that we could figure out a way to alternate or to have some coverage during the weekends? I know we've got, I know in my neighborhood alone, and I would assume that it's citywide, seems to me like we've got a lot of folks that start very early on Sunday morning and get finished up on Sunday afternoon, and I often wonder if that's by design. So I'm wondering if weekends might not be a good time for us to check on folks that are obviously doing contractual type of work.
Right.
But maybe in somebody else's truck, or maybe doing it on the side, or doing it on their own, or something.
I certainly believe that to be the case. Mr. Seifert manages that part of the program. At least from a recruitment standpoint, you foresee any issues in recruiting someone that would be part of their schedule?
It's always been a goal that we would like to do that. Having one person, that's tough to have them work 5 days in a week.
Sure.
But certainly going through the recruiting process and having those discussions, we would certainly pursue that.
I think it's an excellent idea because you're right. We don't have business license inspectors out there checking on weekends. Isn't happening today. And I suspect you're right that there's a number of folks who know that. And so whether we're able to do that regularly or we're able to do that on a random basis, as long as we're able to get out there and do that, I think it would be beneficial.
And that may even be the place to start. I mean, if we randomly show up on Saturdays once a month or twice a month, or Sundays once a month or twice a month, I suspect the word would get around pretty quick.
Yeah. We will certainly make sure that we incorporate that into that. Excellent idea. Other questions or comments relative to admin? No. Department 412 is our courts department. Kirsten is with us this evening as well. If you have any questions specific to her operations, she can share that with us tonight as well. But again, in front of you, you will see the shift between current and what was recommended and what is being proposed. No significant changes that I observed. But do want to make you aware that as you are, and we've had some conversations about this in the past, the workflow and the volume in our municipal court continues to grow. We've demonstrated that from year to year, but we know that we have to be able to continue to manage that as well. One of the things that she asked for this year was for us to create a full-time position. I met with Ms. Presley and we came to some understanding that might be a little difficult to do all at one time. So we came to a compromise that I would recommend that we would create a full-time position for a ministerial recorder because of the work volume and the workload. She actually has an employee that can't take time off is one of the problems that we're having because it makes us uncovered. And the ministerial recorder, by law, we have to have that function occurring. So we've made a compromise that we would create that full-time position. We would delay that until the beginning of the second quarter of 2016-17, allowing us for a little bit of buffer. And that we would also agree that if she has attrition with her part-time positions, that position would be held open until the end of the fiscal year, and then I would make recommendation to council again next year for that position to be reinstated. Attrition is a natural part of our process. We think it's a reasonable way to kind of help manage that workflow. It's one of our smaller departments, so it has a greater impact to their overall budget when we look at creating a full-time position. Certainly believe that it's warranted, and Ms. Presley indicates that she thinks that is manageable and would be a great resource to keep her moving forward. Ms. Presley, anything to add to that? Again, as you look through her budget, if there are any items that, that you see that you would like for us to address, we are glad to do that. But hers were pretty consistent from one year to the next.
I certainly think she's be commended for minimizing overtime. I see we've increased the budget for overtime, and I guess that raises a bigger question in terms of a broader answer, even for just courts. Will the new federal ruling in regards to the overtime hours affect us, and in what regard will it affect us?
Very good question. Yes, sir, it will. We're estimating that the impact of that new federal legislation will cost us about $80,000 in this next year. It does not take effect until December 1st.
Right.
And as a result of that, I've been able to include half of that cost in the budget. I've incorporated it into the budget. But we're funding half of it this year, and we'll fund the other half next year just because of the rule change. For those folks who may not be familiar with the rule change, the threshold has increased to, the 47,127 or something like that. But any employee at a salary below $47,000 will be considered under Fair Standard Labor Act rules as a non-exempt employee and must be compensated for hours over 40 or under their FSLA standards at time and a half. We have employees that were below that threshold that were exempt employees, and so because of that rule change, we will be limited to compensatory time of 240 hours. Anything above the 240 hours must be paid in monetary compensation, and based on where we are today, we're estimating that to be right at about $80,000.
Thank you.
You're not welcome. That was a tough one. But I'm glad we knew about it before the fiscal year started. That was tough.
I think the old threshold was 27 and the new one's 42. Was that?
That may be right.
It's 47.
47, okay.
Yeah, so it went up $20,000
Okay.
in a single, at a single time. And we'll make some adjustments for that in a number of ways, but it will have impact. Questions relative to courts? Okay, we'll move along. Department 419 is General Government Operations. I'll ask Mr. Seifert to assist with this as well. But you will see that under General Government Operations, those are those expenditures that are typically not identifiable or the responsibility of one of our 7 designated departments. Therefore, those expenses would then go into General Government Operations. I'll call your attention to a couple of line items. One of those is street lighting. You'll see that there's a pretty significant increase there of about $70,000 above what was originally requested. The reason for that is, and I'll have more detail in a few moments concerning the overall program, but we are in a position to modify our lighting program citywide, but we are also in a position that particularly that work will begin on the Wade Hampton Boulevard corridor, on the Poinsett Street from Wade Hampton Boulevard to downtown, and from Wade Hampton Boulevard to the Barnett Bridge on Main Street, that we would be changing all of the fixtures over the next year from high-pressure sodium fixtures to LED. We will be increasing the number of LED fixtures threefold. We're going from a little under 100 fixtures to a little over 300 fixtures on Wade Hampton Boulevard alone. But it will be a signature project that will be significantly different than what we have anywhere else, and really what I've seen in any other community. We've run a demonstration project on Wade Hampton Boulevard for about the last 6 months. Many of you, you've had an opportunity to go and see those lights and what they look like. It changes the appearance of that corridor tremendously. And while we will be paying more in total dollars, our cost per fixture, our cost per kilowatt hour, and our cost per lumen goes down for every type of light that we would use by going to the high efficiency LED lights. We're just using more of them because we're trying to get a more uniform pattern throughout the city. But the first ones that you would see would be Wade Hampton, Poinsett, Maine, and all of downtown. And we would see that over the next year. And then as we would replace fixtures citywide, any replacement would go from the existing high-pressure sodium light to the LED. So a light goes out, a new light is added. Wherever that occurs citywide, we would be replacing those with the high-efficiency LED fixtures. And then over time, we really believe that over a 10-year cycle, and particularly that 20-year, because the lights have a 20-year life, we will save significant dollars because of the efficiency of the LED fixtures. But this is an initial upfront because we're adding so many on Wade Hampton Boulevard. So you'll see that under general government as well. You will notice under Greer Trust, at the very bottom of page 9 of 40, you will notice that that amount has gone up to $1,624,739. Mr. Seifert tells me that this year is indeed the peak. That is the highest that debt payment will be over the life of the debt. And I think one more year in the remaining cycle, it may equal that or close to it, but this is the peak.
And it is the peak in the next year or two. It takes a decrease, and then in the third year, it takes a little increase again. And then every year after that until the life has ended, it decreases. But this is the peak this year.
So this is not just the midway point, this is the peak of that, and then it's a slower slope down the backside, is that?
Correct. This is the peak of the total debt service over the life.
So the total life is approximately how many more years from this point?
2023.
Okay.
You'll see some shift in our allocation to Greer Development Corporation, but that's a formula distribution. We allocate 7 1/8% of our local business license revenue from the prior year collection. And so 7 1/8 of last year's collection is the 209,866. We are continuing with our commitment to set aside $500,000 for Greer Station. That's the $125,000 that you. Wait a minute, I'm backing up. We moved that, didn't we, David? We did. So what happens when I'm read off a different page? We have moved that. It is still there, but it has been moved over to one of our special funds. That is in our real property fund now, and we'll talk specifically about that in a few moments. But the purpose of those dollars will ultimately, they're set aside for improvements that we will be making, infrastructure improvements that we would be making downtown. So we're going ahead and setting those dollars aside so that they're earmarked specifically for that purpose. Otherwise, if they're not expended in the general fund, as you would know, they then would roll back into our fund balance. We think it's appropriate that they be designated and set aside since we've committed those funds, and those dollars that we have set aside previously, those are also being allocated into that real property fund and set aside and earmarked as well.
Mr. Driggers, I know Mr. Deaton is with us this evening. Is their fiscal year the same as ours? Do they use a calendar year or use a fiscal year?
Calendar year for GDC.
So it's too early to determine yet. Mr. Deaton, what's for calendar year 16, what was your total budget?
$390,000.
Okay, close enough. Okay, thanks.
Primary resources being from the city, CPW, and Partnership for Tomorrow.
Yeah, okay.
Right. Mr. Seifert, any other significant changes that you recall relative to general government operations?
Probably the biggest one you will see in the off-site hosting and support line 00511, an increase for budget purposes from 38,000 to 49,000, just an $11,000 increase. And what is contained in that is under the new FOIA laws, through one of our computer vendors that we already have, we have a new module that we'll be recommending for purchase in this next fiscal year to handle the FOIA requests and the social media tracking, so that when those requests come in, that we have one location that all those entries are maintained. And then the second piece of that is the next phase, implementing the next phase of our disaster recovery. So those are contained within the increases there in line 511.
Mr. Seifert, for FOIA requests, particularly electronic requests, has there been any determination, either legally or otherwise, about a retention schedule? I mean, at what point are we responsible for maintaining a record of digital transmission?
The state law on retention really rests on the record and what category the record falls into. Is it a financial record? Is it a legal record? Et cetera. It really does not matter to law what medium that record takes. So if it is a financial record, even held in digital format, it will be retained for 5 years like a paper record.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. All right. Thank you.
Other records are for life. Tammy has some records, no matter what the format, that those records can never be destroyed.
Actions of the city and
Minutes, those types
city,
of things, that they can't ever be, disposed of, destroyed. Relative to those which are not records, but maybe like email communications and those types of things, if they are retained in files. But our process is that our records, for example, Dave, like mine, anything that goes to a deleted folder more than 1 year is permanently deleted. And so there isn't there is nowhere to go and retrieve a deleted email that is more than a year old. It's just gone. Because there is no requirement to do that longer. Now, if it's part of a project record, that email may be set aside in a folder or as part of that record, and therefore it could be discoverable for a longer period of time because of that. So I think the short answer of that is it depends, but it's primarily what it is. The state regulates what those retention schedules are for some things. Others, it's a matter of local policy. Questions relative to general government operations that you may see at this point? No personnel in general government operations. We would go to Department 422, Fire Department. Chief Flowers is with us this evening and members of his staff as well. I'll move around a bit, and I'm going to allow Chief Flowers to come up and address council as well. Many of the things that are proposed in this budget you are familiar with because we addressed them during your planning retreat earlier this year. One of the things that is always challenging with a new department head is that there is no historical perspective of preparing the budget. Therefore, as a new department head approaches the budget, they're looking at it purely from the perspective of here are the things that I either need to do or these are the things that I would like to do to advance this department. Chief Flowers has done a really good job of staying in communication, probably has spent more hours with the finance department than anyone simply because it became very complicated for a number of things that were taking place. Relative to the fire department requested 3 full-time firefighter positions in the budget, and I am recommending to you the approval of those 3 full-time firefighter positions. We looked at a number of scenarios of dealing with several issues within the department. One of those being callback time for our employees. One of those being managing absenteeism relative to earned days off, vacation leave, time away due to sick leave. And those can be real challenging in a department with many senior employees with a great accumulation of both annual leave and sick leave. We've done some restructuring within the department. And then you will also see, and I'll address it at this point, but you'll also see in the police department that we are proposing the addition of 4 additional telecommunicators, and that's relative to the program that Chief Flowers has been working with our partner departments at Boiling Springs, Lake Taylor's, and Pelham. Yes. In that situation, we will look at dispatching those calls for each of those stations internally from our dispatch center. We needed additional resources in our dispatch center anyway. This was an ability to be able to do that. We will do an interdepartmental agreement between the police department and the fire department on the services that the expectations and the services provided for those employees, one for the other. We believe that can be achieved with good understanding and good communication. 2/3 of that expense will be paid for by our partner departments, and we will bear 1/3 of the expense associated with doing that. This is innovative. This is thinking in ways that really allow us to move the department in some directions that maybe are just unique for us because we have a different perspective. So very excited about that as well. Recommending the 3 positions that Chief Flowers that he proposed in his budget as well. This allows him that he would be fully staffed. I'll look out the side of my eye, but what he has indicated to me is that if these 3 positions can be achieved, that indeed puts him at full staffing for the equipment and the facilities that we have today. Now, if we add stations or we add apparatus or we add services, that would be a different story. But in our existing structure, those 3 additional firefighters allow him to restructure his shifts to a battalion shift, and he believes that until we make changes in our overall coverage, that the partnerships with our other sister stations, we're ready to go. Chief, I'm speaking for you, but anything that you'd like to add?
I would step up if anybody has any questions. What Mr. Greer has actually said is exactly correct, and that's what we've talked about. And while this I have shared with you at previous points throughout the year. So if you have any specific questions, I'll be more than happy to answer those.
Chief, we've made a conscientious decision to bring a conclusion to our volunteer program. I see that there's no request or approval for volunteers next year, so I'm assuming that signifies the end of that program.
Not necessarily. What we're doing, there's no reason for us to have that as a separate line item.
Okay.
So what we're going to do is the current personnel, because we already pay them when they come back for calls and stuff like that. So technically, they're not volunteers. We're just going to wrap them up into the other salary line items. So they will remain, the ones that we have will remain.
Is that until attrition takes care of those remaining ones, or is there a path forward in that regard, or?
We have not looked at adding any at this point in time, but we would continue to maintain the ones that we have for as long as they're obviously interested, as long as they can continue to meet the requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Overall bottom line is not a significant, overall significant change. 3,331,23, 3,537,565. What you see are a lot of amendments and changes within line items, and of course the lion's share of that increase is what it would take to fund those 3 full-time positions and provide benefits for those full 3-time positions. The 4 telecommunicators are located in the police department's budget because they will be employees of the police department and supervised by the police department, but they are being brought in and funded through the agreements that we have with the fire department.
Chief, just as a matter of interest, I see that there was a request and actually an approval on a line item for professional dues.
Yes, sir.
Fairly significant. Looks like we've gone from about $800 to $4,000. Is that because of the restructuring we've done internally in the organizations that those folks will belong to, or that you belong to, or why the?
Some of that is actually stuff that we have previously paid out of other line items. So we're just putting it where it actually should be coming out of. That's really what that is. So a lot of that was covered at different line items previously and just paid out of there.
Chief, this is simply a matter of information, and I suspect Mr. Seifert could give me the information as well as you, but since we've got you here, I'm occasionally asked to sign the Fireman's Fund for purchases. Where does that funding come from, and where does it go to?
That is funding that comes through the state, correct?
State insurance fund.
Right, it's a 1% fund, and it's money that comes into our department. There's very strict regulations on what those things can be used for, what they can't be used for, and of course there has to be a local oversight, and that's where you come in play as well as myself and staff within the fire department. There's certain things that it can be used for. For example, if it's really geared towards like retention efforts, things like that for the fire department. So instead of us coming to you and asking for, say, a TV or something like that for the fire station, then we can use those funds for things like that. Something we've done in the past is, and you'll see an increase in there for uniforms. We have paid for some uniform items out of that. Some of that's appropriate, some of it's not, and the reason being is when we purchase those items with that money, those items then belong to the individuals and not the department. So then we have no control over when or where they wear and use this equipment outside of the department. So, for example, if we wanted to purchase T-shirts for uniform use, such as when they're working on equipment, things like that, so they don't mess up the stuff like I'm wearing here, which is much more expensive. We could do that, and we have done it in the past, but once we've done that and issued that to them, that is theirs to keep until it falls apart. So, they could in turn take it and wear it somewhere, maybe it's inappropriate or, things like that, and of course they don't return it when they leave.
Does turnout gear remain with the city, or is that?
Turnout gear does remain with the city, yes, sir.
Okay. All right, thank
Mayor,
you.
the question you asked, the 1%, because our chief, he comes from another state, and I don't think they have that, but it's actually a tax.
Right.
And it's on fire insurance premiums, and the state collects it and then divvies it up to the departments. And the purpose of it was recruitment and retention. And I'm assuming because it was established maybe 100 years ago now,
Long time.
but it was established probably for mainly volunteers, to get them to come be a volunteer and to keep them. That's why when what the chief mentioned about buying a T-shirt or a jacket or whatever, it's theirs. It's not the department's.
Right, absolutely. And we had something similar in North Carolina, but it was structured a little differently. The funding mechanism was the same, but the funding mechanism or the use of it was different.
Thanks.
And again, as we review and move forward, we're glad to come back and answer anything. But if there's anything that's kind of on the page that stands out for you a little bit, we certainly want to make sure that we are addressing those as well. Okay. Thank you, Chief. In the Police Department, Fund 435, we have a couple representatives with us this evening. Captain Hamby is with us, and we have any questions, we're certainly able to address those to him and other members of the department. The Police Department requested 6 uniformed patrol officers in this budget. I am recommending to you that we would fund 3 of those. Also within the department is the 4 telecommunicator positions that I mentioned previously. What the department has asked to do, and address this with you during your planning session earlier, was to create a Zone 5. We believe that our patrol areas, which are now in 4 zones of the city because of our continued growth of the city, we believe that that needs to be expanded to a 5th zone, and we think that we can do that efficiently. But to expand, to create that zone, we need 6 uniformed patrol officers to do that. It would be my desire that we would ramp that up over a 2-year period. We would bring half of those in during this fiscal year, and then we would do the other 3 during the next fiscal year if resources allow us to be able to do that. I believe being able to do that over a 2-year period gives us a certain advantage, and what if we could afford it, we'd do all 6 at one time. But I believe by doing the 3 and 3, because of our cycle, July 1, we typically, it'll take us a little bit of time to go through the process of starting to do that. If we're able to get the other 3 positions a year from now, that's not 2 years as in 24 months, it's more 2 years as in 13 months. So over a 13-month period, we could ramp up and prepare for that 5th zone. And we think that there could be great benefit to our residents of us being able to do that. We have reviewed, we know that our community's perception of us for public safety in both police and fire is extremely high. We also know that their expectations of us are very high as well. I believe the department's done a great job of using the resources that we have available within the department, but creating that 5th zone is one of our highest priorities. And again, we believe that we need to do that because of call volume and the geographic area of the city that we would see that as a benefit. Also within that department, there was a request to move 2 part-time positions to full-time. One was a clerk in their CID department, criminal investigations, and the other was a part-time position, I think, as a records clerk, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? CID or records clerk. I am recommending that one of those positions be allowed to go from part-time to full-time. I've indicated back to the chief that that would be his call. He knows the work volume of those existing personnel. I do believe that the work is there. We've monitored the volume, the quantity of work that is going through both of those positions, but we can't do everything at one time. So again, I'm recommending 3 of the 6 uniformed patrol officers. I'm recommending that one, either the CID or the records clerk position, be allowed to move from part-time, existing part-time to full-time. And then the other are the telecommunicators that 2/3 are being funded by our partnerships with the other fire departments. That's the personnel side of what's happening in the police department.
Let me ask you about the telecommunicators. They're going
Yes,
to
sir.
be working for the police department. But is their primary responsibility going to be to service the fire calls?
Yes. Yes.
So why aren't they working for the fire department?
Because in our telecommunications department, within that space, we have a supervisor that is dedicated to the operations inside 911. I don't think it's feasible to have an additional supervisor, and I just don't think it's in the best interest of managing employees in that very small environment that I've got a person in a chair on one side of the room that reports to one department and a person on the other side of the room in another chair in the same space that reports to another department. That's why I believe that the interdepartmental agreement has to be established, and the police department will have to be held accountable for the resources and providing the resources that the fire department needs. And I think we're going to be held accountable by our partner stations as well, because they're funding 2/3 of the cost. We've been meeting for months. We believe that it's workable and doable. But if we determine that it's not for any number of reasons, then we will have to come back and rethink how that's structured. But at least initially, we're proposing that they would be all under the umbrella of the police department, but their primary objective in coming into that center is to handle that additional call volume that'll be taking place for the fire department. They'll be cross-trained, and they could take police calls, and police can still take those fire calls. But we're setting up those workstations for us to do police and fire. But we all know that circumstances and staffing and just events could dictate that they need to be able to have interconnectivity between the two. So we want the training to be there on both sides. And we just don't think that two people doing the same job can work for two different departments. Okay. And Captain Hamby promised me that he would make it work. Right? Yes, sir.
Captain, I'm on shaky ground to even ask this, because I am as well as the police department in the red on my travel and training expense. But looks like, at least for the second year in a row, you've overshot your travel and training allocation pretty significantly. It looks like nearly 50% this year. I admire that you requested a rather large increase to help cover that. But looks like the approval is even less than what you spent on travel and training this year. Is that an area that's been noted?
Captain, if I can, before you get started, yes, sir, and thank you for noticing, because it does need to be identified. I'm going to allow Mr. Seifert to address it, but it's because we supplement that through the confiscated funds that are separate resources, and that is a reimbursement to that fund. And so while they are trying to wean themselves off of the confiscated funds, I'm recommending that we wean it a little slower than they were.
Okay. All right.
That will be reimbursed by year end.
Okay. All right. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Thanks.
Captain, if you got more to add, that's fine, but that's, okay. Very good.
I haven't got that easy an answer, so.
Yeah. It will catch your eye. You're exactly right. No dispute. The police department is obviously our largest department, largest number of employees. It has the largest percentage of our overall budget. And so you will see larger numbers relative to that department. So you're absolutely right. There was an adjustment made on travels, meeting, and training, trying to not get them completely off of that confiscated funds, but to do that slowly. So we're hoping that by next year we can have them completely not relying on that fund, because we're getting to the point that all of those monies are now completely budgeted. We're in the process of trying to spend it down because we're at life's end on that program.
Thank you.
Lodging, boarding and lodging of prisoners is one of those areas that will fluctuate for us from year to year. You can see that, prior year, we actually spent $240,000. We thought we had some things under control and we were going to be able to manage that a little differently. We budgeted at $185,000. Currently, we've already spent about $163 this year. We think the 209 is a reasonable number, but we really never know how many prisoners we're going to have. And so it's a very difficult number to manage. And so the responsibility then falls on both our courts department and on our police department to make sure that we are transitioning prisoners, particularly on the Greenville County side, as quickly as we can. We actually pay for prisoners in Greenville on an hourly basis, and we pay for prisoners on the Spartanburg County side on a daily basis, but after 7 days, I believe it is. After 10 days. We're again, that's just policies of the two individual counties, but just by sheer volume of number of residents, we tend to have more arrests and more incarcerations on the Greenville County side as well. I've asked them for a long time to, chase them to the other side, but that's just not always easy. So anyway, that's one of those areas that you'll see some change. That was probably one of them that was a little more significant. A little higher on contingency, simply because of the size of their budget. They're more likely, in my opinion, to have unanticipated expenses, and if they do occur, they're going to occur at just a different level. So we've tried to appropriate a few extra dollars there. But where you see the real significant changes there is the cost of those 4 telecommunicators and 3 full-time police officers, uniformed patrol officers. Additional questions at this time? Very good. If we could, we'll go to Fund 445, Public Services. Skipper is with us this evening. Skipper does an excellent job of managing what's going on in that department. Always does a wonderful job of managing his overall expenses, but is getting stretched a little thin. He asked us for 3 positions this year. I am recommending to you that 2 of those are funded within the department. He asked for 2 Public Service 1 positions. Those are positions that would primarily be used in our street division, sidewalk repair and replacement, pothole repair, all of those things that take place inside the Public Services Department on that public works side. He's also requested a Public Service 2 position that would be used primarily to assist with upkeep of our buildings and facilities. As we are all aware, this building and the Cannon Center and the Police and Courts building, while we're very proud of them and they look really good, they're not new buildings any longer. And as a result of that, systems within these buildings are requiring more attention. And so upkeep is becoming more time intensive for these facilities. And we've tried our best to use resources from the Public Services Department to come and assist on a regular basis. But we believe that we're at the point that there's just the volume of what has to be maintained is at that point that we need some additional resource to take care of our properties. And so that's what you will see there. Relative to the Public Services Department. The other items in Public Services are pretty pretty static to prior year. You see as adjusted 1,394,797 to 1,363,856. So overall, there's actually an overall decrease in the operational expense of the department. He may get the award for being the only one that was able to accomplish that. But if there are line items of particular interest or concern, Mr. Seifert as well, if there's any that you recall that there was a significant change to, I don't have any highlighted on my sheets.
They want to add 4 total positions. Did you say it was 2 and 2?
No, he requested 2 and 1, and I'm recommending 1 and 1.
Sorry.
Public service worker 1, public service worker 2. Okay. We can always come back. Our recreation department, department number 450. Ms. Cunningham is with us this evening, representatives of her department as well. And pleasantly surprised me this year in that she did not ask for 21 new employees.
Shoot high and shoot high.
Ms. Cunningham, as all of our department heads did, they did a really good job of recognizing that there were certain things. I mean, this might be a good point a good opportunity to back up. One of the things that we do in preparing for this process is not only does council meet earlier in the year and we have an opportunity to engage with you about priorities and what's important to you and what we're hearing from our community, but our staff also has the opportunity that we gather for a couple of days each year as well. And one of the things that we review in that process is what we are anticipating our resource needs are going to be, and particularly that it's capital and personnel. And so when one department head is hearing another department head talk about what is a priority within that department and what they're trying to achieve, and then we come and we meet with you and we hear what is a priority for you and what we're trying to achieve, when we go back and prepare the budget, it's good that we have a team that is listening to each other and they're saying, okay, I understand what your resource needs are. I'm not going to make requests that I would have normally made or that I may need to make, but because I understand the priority of what we're trying to achieve. Ms. Cunningham was a great example of that this year. We talked a lot about being able to utilize and continue to utilize part-time positions, and that's what she's recommended. She recommended that an existing part-time recreation supervisor's hours be increased. They were already there, but she asked us to increase those hours. I think that was a reasonable request based on the amount of participation that individual was involved in. She also asked that as we are creating additional space for and we're placing higher emphasis on our cultural arts program, that we would have a part-time position that would assist us with as a rec leader, as a program leader on the cultural arts side. Again, that is as a part-time position, and I'm recommending to you that we would approve that. And then also because of her facilities, an additional facility being added to her inventory, she has asked that a part-time custodian be added to her department, and I do believe that is reasonable, and she's been able to work that in with her existing budget, and I'm recommending that to you as well. So an increase from one part-time position, creating a part-time position for cultural arts rec leader, and creating a part-time custodian position for her facilities is what's included in hers. I don't think I missed that, Ann, right? I think that's it. You can see in her department, there are some increases to operations, but it's typically either in programming, and if they're, and particularly with her programming, that is based on participation in our rec programs. You'll see that there is some increased cost in utilities. I particularly wasn't fond of seeing that, but as we extrapolated what we think will be the actual cost for the end of 12 months, the amount that is recommended there, we believe that in our existing programming and doing what we're doing today, that is what will be needed. The lion's share of this is outdoor field lighting, but we are bringing another building online that will also have utility costs associated with it, the auditorium property. So by adding that to our existing inventory, we needed some additional resources there as well. Ms. Cunningham or Mr. Seifert, there may have been some other justification there, but that's the ones I recall. Is that right?
We're also paying for the veterans hotline. We're paying those over a period of time, that we change those light fixtures, the head fixtures, and
Gotcha.
then change those LEDs. Sorry.
Get my notes. Excuse me just a minute. Right, let's see. It includes an increase of $300 per month for new light poles at Veterans Park. And then an additional almost $883 an average of utilities at City Auditorium. So we changed the head fixtures over at Veterans Park and upgraded those to LED lights instead of replacing the entire pole, because that would have cost a tremendous amount of money. So I think we really did a great job in trading out those headlight lights and globes and repainting those poles. I think they look really nice. But CPW is working with us on that and actually letting us make payments to them.
Your budget adjusted at $2,145,095, recommending to you at $2,347,097.
Is the rec leader going to be in the arts department?
Yes.
Or do-
Arts
So that's going to be
division.
the,
Yes,
okay,
they'll be
that's the
working with
part-time
Brian.
one for that, okay.
Ms. Cunningham, it doesn't have any bearing on our budget discussion, but as we left it at the last council meeting, I think there was going to be some follow-up discussion, negotiations, et cetera, with the construction company on the Century Park. Have we made any progress on that? Have we signed contracts or ready to move forward?
The contract has not yet been signed.
Okay.
We're in negotiation right now for concrete.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Other questions while we have Ms. Cunningham with us or other members of her team? Again, glad to come back. Department 451 is our Building and Development Standards Department. You'll notice that the format of their budget is a bit different, and that is because they choose to break out. Now, we've consolidated it for your purposes by rolling it up to total expenditures for the department, but you'll see that there are several different line items because they separate within the department expenses for their separate divisions. And that's a good tool for managing those resources within the department, but that's why you see it that way. Amended budget at $1,092,802, proposed at $1,160,349. The department requested that we consider, in fact, this is, I think, the third year that they've asked that we consider bringing a planner on board with our staff. We've been looking at that for a number of years. As you are aware, planning services are provided to us by Greenville County, but as we anticipated and is what is occurring, the amount of resource that they are dedicating to us and our planning efforts is getting a little bit smaller each year. And so we weren't overly surprised that would happen over time. But bringing on a full-time professional trained planner, we think that there is great benefit to us as we look at finalizing, obviously, the update to our comprehensive plan. Truly, the next step for us is we're going to have to engage in the process of a new comprehensive plan. And that will be shortly around the corner, and we're going to need to be experienced and ready to deal with that. We are dealing more with results of citizen surveys and how we are able to interpret that data and do plans relative to that data, public engagement. So again, we believe that we've kind of held off on that but they also recommended that we would have a full-time intern that we've done in recent years with a master's level planner from Clemson University. Considered both of those, and I'm recommending in the budget that we would appropriate for the planner's position, but by bringing the planner on board, I am not recommending that we would do the intern as well. I believe that we can move forward and do well with those additional planning resources. We would continue to work very closely with Greenville County and the Greenville County Planning Department. We would continue to work closely with Spartanburg County and their planning department as well. But the growth that we've had with our GIS department has just been phenomenally strong for us. We are able to do things today that we were not able to do in years past. And the planner resource, they've made a reasonable argument that I believe we are ready for that next level. And I think that the city and you as council would definitely see benefit of that position as well. And that would come under our planning and zoning division under building and development standards as well.
What exactly does a planner do?
Plan.
If we can't do anything else right here, we can plan. We can come out with some plans.
Yeah. And you know, and you're absolutely right. But one of the things that we do know is that for and be eligible for much of the grant resources that are available, those planning efforts have to be demonstrated or we do not qualify to even be considered. So we think that it will open the door for us for more consideration for some grant opportunities. That can't be guaranteed because it's competitive, but we certainly get to put our name in the pot more times than not because we will be in a position to do that. We are required under the South Carolina Planning Act to do a certain degree of planning, and we've been able to achieve that with our partnership with the county. But again, those hours are less than they have been each year, and they're lessening. And so it's a function that we have to be able to demonstrate for us to operate a planning commission as well as a zoning board of appeals and a board of architectural review. We have to have, either through our partnership with another agency or on our staff, we have to have a certified planner.
How does that affect Glenn's position?
Glenn coordinates the planning efforts with Greenville County. He doesn't do, and a lot of that planning is actually spearheaded by Mr. Sale through our citywide strategic plan. So what Mr. Pace will be more involved, will still be on the zoning and the annexation side of things. He will have, and it'll be up to Mr. Grant to decide how he will structure the department, who reports to whom. But that planning and zoning is that side of the three-legged stool. So for us, it's engineering, building codes, and planning and zoning. That's how that department is set up. It's worked really well for us because they are able to incorporate, whether it's someone who's considering annexing their property, opening a business, constructing a business, submitting plans for plan review, coming in and working through building inspection. We call it cradle to grave, but being able to deal with those same personnel who are completely familiar with the project from beginning to end. It was the success we had with the inland port. We're one of the few municipalities that are structured the way that we are structured, so that there isn't a handoff to someone else who isn't familiar with a project. Our folks are all, they're centralized together, they meet together, they talk about projects, and so Ruthie is going to know about a project that's just in the inquiry stage before a building permit is applied for and issued. That helps our projects really understand what's required of us, and it just makes it a much smoother process. We believe.
We'll talk more.
Well, yeah, and just very quickly, I'll add to that, Mr. Bettis. I spent some time last week with Mayor of Malden as we discussed budgeting process, and they use a committee system and staffing and that sort of thing. And it was interesting. One of the things that came up during that conversation was that Malden has a full-time planner on staff. John Gardner was hired in that position. His expertise is in transportation planning, but he addresses a lot of other issues. But one of the comments that the mayor made was that he had paid for himself many times over in terms of grants and funding that he had been able to acquire that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise had it not been for his time and attention directed to those kinds of things. So I think there could be benefit very similar to what we see with the business license inspector or others, that you're not just there to pay for yourself, but in some cases it's the benefit of what they do is certainly well worth whatever their salary is. And it may be that, we may not be looking so much for a transportation planner as much as a more urban designer, or there's all different kinds of planners. So I think it'd be something that would be worthwhile looking into.
Again, Steve Grant's with us this evening. He prepared the departmental budget, reviewed finance and myself. Not really notably significant line item changes that are there. Most significant is the addition of that planner position. But as you look through those, if there's any line item that kind of stands off the page, gives you any concern, we want to make sure we address that.
Why do we have like five salaries, five?
They separate it by division. They do it for engineering, they do it for planning and zoning, and they also separate it for
Stormwater.
building codes, and stormwater, right?
We didn't do our last one.
Yeah. They just elect to manage theirs a little bit different than the other departments, and they manage it by division versus total department. So with that being said, that brings us to the totals. Again, recommending at $22,450,525. In Fund 11 would be any transfers that are required. Mr. Seifert, anything that you would like to address relative to transfers? 11.
From Fund 11 in transfers, you see $325,000 transfer to the real property fund. We'll be covering that fund maybe a little later tonight if we make it that far. But just in short, that is continuing funding our commitment to the Greer Station for the amount of $125,000, and then an additional $200,000 for some planning for the downtown Greer Station area. The second transfer there is our annual transfer to the paving fund to continue the paving of streets throughout the city, and the paving fund will see in the paving fund budget.
Are we ready to keep going, or you want to take a break, or you want to come back another night? Because we're at special funds, and those do usually move pretty quickly.
Yeah, let's take a quick break. We're going to go ahead and plow on for a little while, so we appreciate your
Over to pizza.
attention and
Then everybody meet at the
having
pizza
gone
place.
through most of the departmental reports, if not all. If it's time for you to head to the barn, that's fine. We're going to go ahead and see if we can knock the rest of this out this evening. So,
But if you're a department head, you might regret it.
all right, you've been fairly warned. I don't see anybody heading for the door now. Mr. Driggers, floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, sir. We will, in order, and should be in the order that's in your package, we'll move into the special fund, starting with Fund 9. That's our Recreation Program Fund. I kind of call that one of our in and out funds, but I will allow Ms. Cunningham and Mr. Seifert to share with you information concerning the Recreation Program Fund. David, I'll let you head off.
Okay, thank you. I thought Ann might be coming up for that behind you, but that's okay.
We'll hold Ann for questions.
With Fund 9, that is the recreation programs. They have gone through and estimated the revenues for each of the programs that they run in the recreation department. And then on the expenditure side, likewise, the programming expenditures for each of the programs that they run through their department. So that would include all of the sports and events, as well as the movies and the history gala and events like that, as well as their general programming.
Anything particular about it, Ann, that you'd like to share? Is anything unusual? Again, it's what we charge for fees, and we deposit it, and then we spend those dollars to run the program.
Or we supplement other programs that may not bring in as much revenue. So, but it is just, we generate revenue and then we put it right back into our programs, whether it might be through scholarships or with materials and things like that. But it is in and out. We don't spend more than we make, let's just say that.
Mr. Cunningham, are we seeing any trends in terms of our purely athletic programming and offerings in that regard, in terms of things that are changing? Looks like for the most part that we offer a lot of different things, and the usage seems to be pretty good. But I know that travel teams and other different kinds of things have, over the years may have cut into that. Do you see anything trending from your perspective that, that we'll need to adjust in time?
I will defer to
You're going to
Corey.
defer?
I will, because he's our expert. So
Yeah,
I will
good deal.
defer to Corey Holtzclaw.
You're correct, and we have to adapt just like anybody else. So we run tournaments just like anybody else does. This entire summer we'll be running tournaments. So when you see baseball, it's not just a kid playing in a league here, but we bring in teams from all over the place. June 4th and 5th will be our first one when we'll start the summer. We have teams from Spartanburg all the way to the other side of Greenville. We've had teams come up from Columbia, all over the place. So it does change, but we try and adapt with it. And we do try and offer some new sports. I know we put in the budget for some knocker ball. We try and run some social sports. We're trying our hands in some things that we've never done before. But for the most part, it seems like our community is pretty traditional in what they would like offered. And it doesn't mean we won't try and run different things and see if it sticks. But we also run a rec side, and we'll run a purely academy side, and that means it's higher level players. It's something we did years back when we saw a trend, like you say. It just depends on what everybody wants, and we try to offer that as much as we can. We can't help everybody with exactly what they want, but we'll try our best.
Good deal. Thank you, sir. Good information. I appreciate it.
They do a really good job.
I had one question on kind of in that vein, what you're talking about is as far as programming. I mean, do we ever, I know several other cities have, like, they try to bring in tons of like baseball revenue or football revenue, or they claim to be maybe the kickball town or whatever. Do we see any opportunities like that moving forward?
Are you saying in regards to getting tournaments in and stuff like that, in regards to that sport, or like a kickball tournament or a baseball tournament? Is that what you're asking the question for?
Yeah, I mean, do you think we have facilities that could house something like that at this point, or is
Typically, if you're going to invite in a tournament, they look for 4 field complexes. That seems to be the minimum standard. It doesn't mean that it can't happen, because like I said, we run tournaments with what we have, and it runs well. And we do try and run tournaments, softball, baseball, football, and whatever we can get our hands in on. But typically, your standard is that 4-field complex. If you're going to go big time, if you're going to invite in a huge tournament.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. I think what we're seeing in terms of a trend on that is it's all about facilities. I mean, if you look at, where the big events are going, it's to the mesas and to the fields like at Tigerville, where you got a 12-field complex down there. Neither one of those facilities have restaurants and or hotels anywhere near them, but yet, they draw huge crowds every weekend. So I think it's more about the facilities themselves than it is maybe the amenities in a lot of cases.
You don't need the huge complexes. I think you can go wrong there, because now you might struggle to fill that up every single weekend.
Yeah.
You just need something that will work with your community. If it's a 4-field complex here, I think something like that would work. You don't need that giant complex. I think that might not be the direction people need to go anymore. But somewhere in between that.
Good point.
But that's, we try and adapt with what's going on with all of the sports. All right.
And two, like City Stadium, we've been working with the drainage issue there. And I think we are just about to the point where we can start really utilizing that field. So not only for football, but bringing in our academy soccer teams in the spring and having play there year-round versus just one season. So I think there's opportunity with what we have. We just need to expand it and maybe think outside the box and doing some different things. So that's kind of where we are.
Thank you. All right.
You're good. Thank you.
you
Lease purchase is fund number 10. I'm asking David and Mike Sale to present some additional information on that. David is most familiar with the technology and security system issues that are relative in that lease purchase budget, and Mike has responsibility of working with each of our departments on their equipment and vehicles. David, who's leading off? You or Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Driggers. As council is aware, we've spent the last few years concentrating and focusing pretty heavily on our vehicle usage and how we manage our fleet in regards to bringing new vehicles in, disposing of vehicles that have met end of life, and how we balance it out with operations and, of course, new hires. This year's no exception. I want to echo what something Mr. Driggers said earlier in regards to how our leadership team and our management team takes a look at requests for equipment. We sit down and discuss what our operational needs are, whether they be new hires or whether there be new responsibilities and duties that the department's picking up, or an expansion of existing duties and responsibilities. And they talk about the equipment that they're going to need. We discuss that together, and so everybody's aware of what each other is going to look at, and we try to work together in how to accomplish what the needs are going to be. As I go through this, there'll be a few requests that were made that aren't even in the budget as a request, and that's because we got out in front of those very early on and took a look at some alternatives about how to accomplish a vehicle need so that a budget request would not be necessary. One of the other things to kind of lead this off is talk about what's been going on in the fire department. As we know, with Chief Flowers coming on, the top and bottom review of not only operations but of equipment, personnel, and everything, and vehicles as a part of that. And taking a look at what vehicles they had available to them, what they needed in order to accomplish the mission with the structure that they had in place with personnel and stations and operations. There was some decisions made about removing some excess vehicles from the fleet that we did not need. Now, while there are a couple of vehicles that had been at end of life for quite a while that we were just kind of holding on to, those were easy to decide to go ahead and move out. We had a couple other vehicles that we had replaced that, as far as a fire vehicle, they didn't have a place in the department. But as we looked at some operations and some needs in some other departments, we decided that we might be able to use some of that equipment and move those vehicles into another department temporarily so that we could afford a new vehicle purchase this year, and I'll address those as I go through the budget. In the lease purchase handout that you have, the first line item that I want to call attention to will be on page 4 of 9, starting off with the police department. The police department had made a request for 5 vehicles for this year. Those vehicles were to address mainly the request for 6 police officers. As Mr. Driggers pointed out a few minutes ago, the recommendation is for only 3 police officers, so we reduced the number of vehicles that we were going to bring in to 3. So we will get 3 new vehicles in the department, and we're going to take a look at, I've looked at their current fleet capacity as far as those vehicles that aren't assigned to an officer but are used by officers that are on shift that do not have a take-home vehicle, that we have kind of cut it a little thin to where if there is a vehicle that goes down, kind of puts them in a bind and being able to make sure that they have everything covered in regards to their vehicle needs. So what we're going to do is, as you are aware, we normally say 1 in, 1 out. This year there's going to be 3 coming in new, but we're going to hold on to 2 of the vehicles that should be at the end of their life, but we believe that we can get another year out of them and use them as reserve fleet vehicles, and then we'll address those needs and take a look at it for next year's budget. So, the vehicles, and of course there are about 3 or 4 line items in the budget for equipment and radios, things like that, to go with those as well. As you'll see on the first line, the request was for $135,000. Their approval was for $81,429. In-car cameras, therefore, is adjusted as well from $13,000 to $8,667. Radars go down from $6,400 to $5,000. You have the in-car computer modems from $9,000 to $6,000 approved, and then the vehicle equipment for those vehicles, that's the lights and the outfitting of the vehicle, from $46,260 to $34,190. One of the notes I'd like to make about the vehicles is that we sat down and we reviewed some research in regards to police vehicles and what the current state of police vehicle capabilities are now. After taking a look at recommendations that are being made nationwide in regards to fleet safety, not only for officers but in general, one of the recommendations or one of the requests that the police department brought to us was to transition from the Interceptor sedans and to start getting in more to the Interceptor SUVs. We start taking a look at what the impact is in regards to maintenance, the upkeep, just the cost up front in general, and the long-term care of the vehicle. Based on the number of considerations that there are for the safety of the officer, higher sight lines, a more heavy-duty vehicle, a better handling vehicle. Maintenance end of it, you have a little bit bigger size tire. Fuel mileage is the same now in between the Interceptor sedans. They're all-wheel drive. SUVs and the Interceptor sedans are all-wheel drive as well. So your fuel usage is minimal. There's a minimal difference between the two. And so based on that, we came to the conclusion that SUVs would be good to transition. However, we can't transition at the same rate that we were for sedans, whereas normally we might get 6 sedans. We're going to be taking a look at transitioning because the cost is a little bit more to do 5, or in this case, we're only doing 3. But, the cost is going to affect the number of vehicles they can get per year. We're taking a look at how many miles that we're putting on vehicles on an annual basis, and we're going to be able to manage those vehicles so that we transition the ones that are giving the higher mileage into the fleet reserve more quickly so we can start reducing the impact on those, and we can retain a vehicle for a longer period of time than we currently are. Overall, we're projecting that the net cost over the long run will actually end up being cheaper than it would be if we just continue to replace at the rate that we had been for the past few years. And if you have any questions, Captain Hamby is here with us. He can also provide additional information in regards to the recommendations for the SUV vehicles versus the sedan Interceptor.
Mr. Seller,
Yes.
can you give me an approximate number of how many take-home vehicles we have in that department?
He's not here.
I cut him loose. Sorry.
You cut him loose.
Sorry.
I think I'm going to go out. I hate to go out on too far of a limb. I think we've got about 65 vehicles total in the department. I think it's around 40, between 35, 40, somewhere around there, their take home.
Okay, I guess that's not as important as we're rotating those out on a schedule. Is that correct? Are those?
Well, the take-home vehicles eventually, like I said, they move into reserve operations because we do have officers that aren't assigned a take-home vehicle yet, and then when they come on shift, they just pull one out of the pool. As those vehicles that are assigned to officers accumulate miles and age, we move those into reserve, and so we can get a year or two more out of them before we have to actually do end-of-life and deadline them.
Okay, I guess my question is this. If we've got somebody that's driving 25 miles one way home and they're putting 50 miles a day on their car just going and coming from work, and we got somebody that's putting 8 miles a day on their car going and coming from home, are those cars rotating out on the same number of years, or are we doing it on miles?
No, well, beginning this year, we started to take a look at making sure we rotate that vehicle so that we can transition that vehicle to a lower driving person so that we can even out those miles over time. You're absolutely right. We have some vehicles that because of its take home, there's a further distance to go. They're accumulating miles. The same, they may be a 2010 sedan. One of them has, 85,000 miles, and the other one has 65 because one lives further away and is putting more miles on. What we're doing now is bringing that vehicle that's got the higher mileage, rotating it into somebody that doesn't, so that over time it'll even out. So once we get to end of life, they'll have equivalent number of miles. That's something we identified this year to do. Because we did notice there's really only probably about 2 or 3 cases that's even the case.
Okay.
There's very few. I mean, there's only a couple that we have that large discrepancy of mileage.
Okay, so I guess what I was wondering is there any disincentive? Because if you're living further away, it seems like you're getting a newer car more often. I mean,
well, in the cases that I know the 2 of the individuals, they did not want to give up their vehicle. They were actually, if you want to say, due a car because of the age of the vehicle. They actually decided to hold off in their vehicle. Like, for instance, if we have the lieutenant for the CID lieutenant, that vehicle may transition as a fleet vehicle for CID, and then that he may get a new vehicle, or a new vehicle may come into the fleet somewhere, but that vehicle is still being moved in to be a reserve vehicle so that we can continue to hold on to it. And it may not only, over the next 2 years, it might only get half the mileage that it would if it stayed with that individual.
And while that may seem to be the opportunity, what we will find is that the additional mileage doesn't necessarily, we don't have an automatic age mileage that it comes out. I mean, we're
Yes.
going to consider age, mileage, and condition. And what we find is that while it may have higher mileage, it may actually be in better condition than a vehicle with lower mileage because of how it's used.
Yeah, we have a couple right now that are in need of transmission work in order to really continue to be used. Rather than going out and spending $4,500 to repair a transmission and maybe drive it for, because of the age of the vehicle, another year maybe, we're repairing so that it'll be maintainable, but yet we'll go ahead and the mileage might not be as high, but we'll go ahead and deadline and GovDeal that, and in the what we'll recoup overall will be higher than spending $4,500 to sell a vehicle for $2,500. And that we're avoiding that as well.
Thank you.
All right. Moving along as far as vehicles, one of the things I would like to point out that won't be reflected in here for the Parks and Recreation Department and the Public Services Department. Both of those departments initially identified a need for a vehicle. What we did is in discussions in regards to the only other vehicle that we're getting new this year is in the Building and Development Standards Department. We're transitioning a high mileage gas guzzling vehicle out of that department that's on the road a lot. It does a lot of city driving. We're transitioning that vehicle to the Public Services Department that'll be utilized by Skipper for his new hire. Rather than him requesting a new vehicle, and we're going to replace that vehicle in Building and Development Standards with a new vehicle. So that is the only other new vehicle request that's been approved for this budget. In addition, the Parks and Recreation Department the Parks and Recreation Department does not have any for their, I don't want to say administrative operations, but not for their utility or their operational aspect for field maintenance and things like that. They do not have a fleet vehicle, and they have a couple individuals that usually end up having to borrow somebody else's vehicle if they need to go somewhere and do something with it. And of course, there are other operational needs they need in the department. We're transitioning the one of the fire vehicles, which was the you may recall it's Carl Howell's Dodge Nitro. The Deputy Fire Marshal's Nitro. It's a burgundy, it's not a fire red, it's not white, but we're transitioning that. We'll unmark it, we'll move it over into Parks and Recreation, allow them to use that as a fleet service vehicle for those needs for this year and avoid making an additional vehicle purchase for that particular department. And then we'll take a look at operations for vehicles next year. But as I mentioned, the only other new vehicle that's been approved is on page 8. Which is a truck for the, is that the nuisance code enforcement officer? Stormwater. For the stormwater inspector. And the recommendation or request was for $27,000. The approval is for $23,000. We decided to go with a, the state does something funny. They have a intermediate, and then they'll have a compact truck line items. The compact is really based on a 4-cylinder. You can actually get the compact in a 6-cylinder, and so we actually just upgraded that vehicle at a cheaper price than if we'd gotten the intermediate truck. So that's why you see the difference between what was requested and what was approved. And that's it in regards to vehicles. Happy to answer any other questions about that. If not, I'll turn it over to Dave for technology.
Thank you. Between the two categories, vehicles and technology, those are the largest categories for spending in the lease purchase budget. So moving to technology, if you look across all the departments, every department has a certain amount of desktop computers and laptops and or the surfaces that they are replacing, older models that we're moving out of the system due to mainly security concerns and software or operating systems on these older systems being end of life and no longer being supported by Microsoft. So you will see that across all departments. Specifically looking at general government is where you're going to see some very large technology dollars, and that is for Department 419, and it starts on page 1 of 9 on the expense side. The very first line item is the event cost technology for $123,000. That is to upgrade the systems in this room and Hall B and Hall C. When we installed the systems that we have 8 years ago, they were, at that particular moment when they were quoted out, some of the best equipment that was available. About a year after we built this building, that technology changed and went from analog to digital, and the digital market and technology just really changed the way that technology works. So we are now 8 years into this analog system and have maxed out its capability, and you have seen some of that in some of the events that we've held. So we are converting these halls to a digital technology. The first phase of that, we are starting with audio, and you will see that take place the first full week of June. We are doing the audio side in this fiscal year. So what you see in the budget request for next year is finishing that project, phase 2, of converting the video side of these rooms and the control network that is in the AV room. So that will be controlling all the audio and video within these halls. The next line item is listed for as security system for $38,000. There are a number of line items in the general government line that are associated with construction projects that are currently going on. This is one of them. This $38,000 will, in this particular line item, will be the rebuilding of the technology and the security network for Century Park for the buildings that are being rebuilt in there. In addition to other construction projects that are going or that are coming soon, we have $20,000 listed for Stevensville to finish up the security there for that renovation that took place about a year or two ago. We have $30,000 in the auditorium line item to complete the technology for the construction and the renovation taking place at the auditorium. And then we have an additional line item at the end of general government for $13,700 that we will enable the computer. They are switches on the network to enable the activity and communication between buildings. Turning to page 2 of 9, you'll see network technology for the amount of $84,700. We have in our network, we have some of our main computers that run the servers that run our network, as well as the storage where all our data is held, have gone end of life and are no longer supported. So we are replacing those servers and the software to run those, as well as the storage and that holds our data. And then the second piece contained in that $84,700 is the second phase of disaster recovery and implementing those methods. Moving down to the middle of the page, there's a computer and equipment line item for $29,500. And everybody is probably very aware and hearing of all the breaches that are taking place around the world and across the nation. We are increasing the firewall capabilities that we have here at the city currently. This will be an additional network monitoring appliance that will monitor the traffic that is traveling in through the network, through the city, and outbound traffic. So if it starts to see significant amounts of data going to a country that we typically don't have traffic to, then it alerts us that there may be a possible breach, and we'll shut that down. So that is in the computer and equipment, and then appear in that feeder line item. So that is covering all of the major items in general government under technology, to include the construction projects as well as the event halls and the backbone of our network for our storage and data communication. If you have any questions on that, we'd be happy to take those.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Less than we spent in the previous year, and certainly less than we spent in the year prior to that. Lease purchase is one of those that it's, some years we just recognize that some of the equipment that we have to purchase, like there's no fire truck in there, there's no large type of equipment, and that enables us to be able to do some of the other things. The evaluation of the vehicles is a big piece of how we're able to continue to manage that. If we could, we'll move to debt service fund. That's fund number 12. Ask David to do that one. So again, debt service is another one of those in and out funds. Debt is debt's our first obligation. We have to fund our debt, and we have a special fund set aside that travels through. Mr. Seifert?
Thank you, Mr. Greer. For the debt service fund, it is one of our simpler funds to explain. As Mr. Drigger's already alluded to, it is money and transfers coming in and the debt service payments on the expense side, covering, for life of the debt service. So we have total transfers coming from the general fund of $1,258,706 and transfers from the hospitality fund of $263,170 for total transfers of $1,521,876. As you flip through pages 1 through 7 on the expenditure side, you will see the individual line items for each department and the lease purchases and or general obligation bonds or revenue bonds that those payments are supporting. That fund is again balanced between revenue and expenditures, total of $1,521,876.
Council, questions? Thank you.
Next fund is Fund 18. That's our hospitality fund. It's one of the funds that we strive to regularly keep you updated. You'll notice that in our monthly reports, we're constantly monitoring the revenue. Particularly, we're monitoring the revenue on the hospitality fund because it can fluctuate based on the economy. And so we monitor that very, very closely. We look out, Susan, your report is a 3-year window? 3-year window? 4-year. So we do a 4-year look back on hospitality and monitor any type of trends that are happening. We can usually tell you when's going to be the month to go get a good deal at a local restaurant because we know what's going to be their lowest months. And it's pretty cyclical. We see certain patterns that happen out there relative to the hospitality industry. David, if you'll take the lead on that, and Ann has some additional information that she can provide if there are questions.
Okay, thank you. Beginning on page 1, we have total revenues of $1,906,700. The largest portion of that is our hospitality taxes budgeted at $1,900,000. That continues to grow each year. As you've noticed tonight during the budget report, we're at 15% over budget for the month of April. So there's very strong sales numbers occurring in the city for the hospitality. Going to the first page of expenditure, page 1 of 3, a large portion of the hospitality fund is transferred to the general fund. That is covering operations for staff of maintaining these facilities, maintaining the grounds, as well as a certain amount of debt service as it pertains to this particular building and this floor. That's about $350,000 annually that we transfer to the general fund which in turn is transferred through the Greer Trust rent payment to pay the debt service. The second line item, $263,170, is additional debt service from the hospitality fund directly to the debt service fund for revenue debt that is guaranteed and paid for by the hospitality taxes through a revenue bond. And then we have two $10,000 line items for continuing real property. The first one is $10,000, that's for continuing funding the gateway. And then the second one is a transfer to the facilities use fund, helping fund the staff covering the museum. And then we get into the program side of the hospitality taxes fund, and I'll let Ann address those.
Any questions? I can go through these if you'd like me to, line item by line item. As for our banners that we put up in our parks, certainly promoting the city and our website, that we do that every year in all of our facilities. International Festival, we have money budgeted, as well as Freedom Blast, pretty consistent with what we've done in the past. Our art series for Tunes in the Park. Special contracts, which would consist of turf management services that we have here. That's actually for 8 different locations. Then we have clay tennis court maintenance, and then custom woodwork repairs for Kids Planet. And then Family Festival is also $8,000. Again, we have money that's accounted for the museum, our contingency, Kids Planet supplies, tennis courts, no, we haven't got those this year. Christmas decorations, we do continuously update those. Some of our other miscellaneous, just as a backup for there, and then Century Park, we have for our PA system that we'll bring in and shade structures that we have to put over our bleachers over at Century. Suber. Let's see, what do we do? Suber, we're looking at, again, dealing with the drainage system over at Suber, we're trying to correct. And then Century Park, as far as for capital expense for ice machine and some of our dugouts to provide new covers. They're hard covers. And moving on to, let's see, Kids Planet renovations. Again, we had that in this year's budget. Again, it will be a continuous process for making sure we keep up to date and keep our standards. Top dressing sands. Again, that will be for purchasing sands and actually contracting someone to help apply that. And some facility improvements, Suber Road. And then we've got City Park. We're looking to reseal the fountain, paint our picnic shelter here, and then install new restroom heaters in our bathrooms. They're in need of being replaced. And then Veterans Park to actually reseal the fountain that's over there in the park. Any questions?
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Fund 19 is our stormwater fund. Steve Grant, our city engineer, and David are most familiar with that program. As you know, it's funded from a stormwater fee. As indicated earlier, we're not proposing that we make any adjustment to the fee, that we would utilize the revenue stream that it's currently generating to fund the budget as proposed. David, Steve?
As Mr. Driggers had just mentioned, we have a revenue from the stormwater fee of $700,000, including a little bit of interest. Total revenue for budgeted for next year, $703,500. About half of that is used to fund the stormwater operations and personnel. through a transfer to the general fund of $351,299. And then there you see the transfer there to the real property fund of $90,000. Moving to the program lines, our requests coming through from the stormwater operations of the Building and Development Standards Department. Largest items there, operation of vehicle, $40,000. That is in large portion covering the street sweeper and the back trucks and repairs for there. And then turning the page, I have $145,000 budgeted for continued stormwater projects and remediation. And the special contracts to this department of $40,000. Those are the largest line items for the stormwater fund. Any questions you might have there?
One of the larger expenditures that we had this past year, which is why you see a decrease as we knew that we needed to do the work out at the recycling center. So that was a $300,000 project, and that project is it's out to bid. So it's and so that's just a large project that we knew would take some of the fund balance. Stormwater typically retains a balance. We use some of those dollars, or we dedicated some of those dollars for the work that we're doing over at Century Park. We're familiar that we dedicated some of those resources. But the fund balance, as projects come up, we do have resources available to us as we're able to try to handle those. Large projects, we try to get those into the budget cycle to make sure that we're prepared to do them. Others that we will do through stormwater projects, and then with the balance there, a great example is we use some of those resources for a big part of the work that we did for the construction of Randall Street, where we made those improvements, added curb and gutter, storm drainage, those types of things. We can do those types of things with these resources as well. We'll use a piece of that resource when we go to do the parking area, with the old SCDOT building, that parking area. Some of those resources will get used for that relative to storm drainage, curb and gutter, those types of things. Then we'll use other resources for the paving.
Council? All right, we'll move on.
Good. Fund 23 is our real property fund. I'll ask Mr. Seifert if he will lead us through that one.
The real property fund this year has fewer projects in it this year than we've had in the past year or two. Starting on the revenue side, we have transfers coming in of $325,000. The expenditures going, those transfers will be covering. We had a request that was ultimately not recommended for approval of $95,000 from the police department to cover the overage charges for the kennel. With this not being approved, they will be using confiscated funds to cover the remaining of those projects for the kennel. The two that I mentioned earlier that were recommended for approval is $125,000 for the Greer station to continue our commitment there, and then $200,000 being set aside for downtown and Greer station planning. Total budget $325,000.
Thank you.
Next is Fund 33, our Public Service Fee Fund. I want to spend a couple of moments getting a little more into the details of that particular fund. I can go to the board at any point, but I want to give you some numbers that we are dealing with in that. In my opening comments, I shared with you that our millage was staying the same, our stormwater fee was staying the same, but we were recommending a shift in our fee schedule relative to this particular fund. What we have right now is we have 13,072 individual parcels of property. Of those 13,072 parcels of property that we assess a $75 public services fee to, we have collection of about 94% of those properties. And that's pretty normal. 95% is our overall tax collection. This one is falling right into place. So 12,400 of our citywide properties paid into the fund at $75, generating revenue of $930,000. We are operating some of the expenses relative to our public services department out of that fund. I am recommending to council that you consider that we would establish a dedicated municipal solid waste or a sanitation fund, that program would be fully funded by the user fee that we collect for the purposes of collecting and disposing of curbside materials. Our residential garbage, MSW, municipal solid waste. We are currently collecting 9,405 households for their curbside collection. Of those 9,405, which obviously is not all of the properties within the city, we have about 2,725 residential units that are inside the city that do not receive that service for a variety of reasons. Many of those reasons are that it's not appropriate for the equipment. It could be that they do bulk collection in those facilities and they don't do rollout collection. It could be that they're on restricted streets, private roads, and because of that, our equipment doesn't operate on those private streets. But there's a variety of reasons that those 2,725 are not receiving the service. What we are discovering is that we believe that it's most appropriate that we identify that a fee will be used for an exclusive use. It is universally accepted in both municipalities and counties that a enterprise fund or a dedicated fee that goes into an enterprise fund. It's not unusual at all that those would be dedicated for garbage. We have looked at that a number of times, and we think that it's the appropriate time for us to consider doing that. And there's a number of reasons for that. At the $75, if we assess the $75 only to the number of households that are receiving the service, 9,405, our revenue generated would be $705,375. We're operating the program at a cost of $1,075,814. That is the cost of our contractor tipping fees to our waste stations and the recycling and green carts that are involved in that program. Even if of the 12,400 that are paying the fee at $75, that is generating $930,000. So you can see in either respect, we are still not generating the total amount of revenue that we are spending for that particular service. So we have a shortfall $145,814. If we're basing it on all properties within the city, that number grows substantially to $370,439 as a deficit if we are basing that on the 9,405. The 9,405 is the number today. Next month, that number will have grown by 25 or 30. The following month, that number will have grown by another 50 or 60. The following month, because we're adding 25 to 30 customers to that program every month. So we're recognizing somewhere around 250, 300 between what can be multifamily and what could be single-family detached. So if we're operating the program today at a loss and we're continuing to add more accounts at a loss, over time, the loss continues to become greater and greater. For sustainability, I am recommending to council that you would consider that we would do a full cost recovery for our residents that are receiving the service under the ordinances outlined that we have for service. Now, what that simply means is that you don't opt in or opt out. If the city provides the service to your residents, your neighborhood, then you are charged a fee to receive that service. Full cost recovery for us in the program that we have for the number of households that are receiving it, and to move that number consistently forward so that it does not lose money, is $115 per year. So we have a number of our residents that are paying $75 and they're not receiving that particular service. We have a number of our residents that are paying $75 and they do receive it, but it isn't enough for full cost recovery. I am recommending to council that you would implement that as a full cost recovery at $115. What does that ultimately mean? That means that 9,405 people today, all things being equal, but as we would move forward, they would pay $115 for that service. Full cost recovery. For those folks, about 3,000 of our 12,400 that are paying the 75, but only 9,405 receiving the service, those 3,000 property owners would no longer pay the $75. That this would go to a true fee-for-service enterprise fund at full cost recovery at $115. It doesn't generate any new money for us. It doesn't cost us more or less. It is revenue and expense neutral, but it shifts that based on whether or not you are or are not receiving the service. That's the gist of the program. You can see in looking at the fund that we are anticipating that if we were to impose that fee, it would generate $1,075,814. That's what you were seeing on page 1 of 1. The remaining pages is what you would see, particularly on page 3. You would see the 4 line items and the associated expenses that would equal that $1,075,814. That $1,075,814 divided by the number of users equals $115 annually. Within pennies. It's 114.83 or something like that. But again, the number changes every single month. We did a 5-year pro forma looking at the cost of the program. We believe that through that with growth of residential units and the contract rate that we have for the service, we think that over that 5-year period, if there is no change to our negotiated rate, that we're able to maintain that, at least for that period of time, at that rate. Correct? Correct. And you have that. We have that as, or did you go model make? Yeah. Mike ran an analysis on that a little bit earlier so that we could see that, we get pretty close in being able to manage the program. So that's the 5-year pro forma that he's handing out now. It would require us to make some amendment to our enabling ordinance when we establish the public service fee, but that would be an amendment to an existing ordinance, and then notification to our residents of who would be affected. Our biggest challenge internally was determining how we would notify the respective counties of which properties would be assessed the fee for garbage. But that can easily be done through our GIS. It's almost identical to the way that we manage our stormwater. We know for every parcel of property in the city, the size of that, and again, stormwater is based on ERU, so we notify the county based on the size of that property what the fee is that is associated for stormwater. We can do that exact same process with our respective counties to the stormwater, to the municipal solid waste fee. It's already set up at both counties on their tax bills. It's set up as a public service fee. We would change the title, but the process would be identical. But instead of them assessing a flat $75 fee for every parcel, we would notify them those parcels that are receiving the municipal solid waste service, and they would assess that on the tax bill for those properties. That would be my recommendation.
Can't believe that I'm going to get the opportunity to endorse this before Ms. Albert does, but apparently.
It's a splendid idea.
I know for years we've talked about the equity and inequity of the across the board fee, and I really like the idea that those that receive the service pay for the service, and I think that it's a very equitable rate. I think it's actually a bargain for our citizens because I know from other communities that paying monthly for a garbage service, this is reflective of a much better rate than you're going to get from a private service, and it's just a matter of scale. It's not that one company is overcharging or charging any less. It's just a matter of scale, and I think this is a good way for us to bring some equity to a situation that long has needed some adjustment. And
You think we could talk Greenville County School District into doing the same thing?
Only if you receive the service.
Yeah, sounds like the same thing to me.
And I do have additional copies, and certainly, but during your retreat, one of the things that we shared with you and reviewed with you is that in this process, because of the efficiency of scale that the mayor mentioned, we are able to provide this service at a cost of $9.58 a month. That would be the cost of the program. The cost for our carrier that we contract with for private services outside the city are $20.50 a month. $22 for another carrier, $22.67 for a third carrier, and $27.33 for a fourth carrier. To the mayor's point, we are very confident that we are able to provide that service to our residents at a cost of nearly, at the lesser amount, half or more than they would be able to contract that on a private basis. And we're able to do that because we're doing the billing and collecting, and a private contractor isn't doing that. And the efficiency of picking up every container on a road versus picking up every third or fourth or fifth, and having multiple carriers. There is just great efficiency in having a single provider and having a single source method for collection of the revenue. In comparison to one of the things you know that we do each year is that we look at our costs compared to our comparison cities. And so we're going to look at a sanitation public works fee for us or for the other folks that we look at annually. We've looked at the total annual fees. We've looked at the annual property tax and fees on the median house value, and we've looked at the percent of median household income required to pay property taxes and fees. And what we have learned in that review of the data is that it does not give us a significant shift or change in comparison to what we look at every single year. Mr. Sell did the data analysis on that earlier today. Anything you'd like to share specific to that, Mike?
One of the things to notice on the first sheet is that in the comparisons that we made at the council retreat earlier in the year, in the winter, at the 115 rate, that would shift us down below Somerville and Spartanburg, or above Somerville and Spartanburg. On that scale, that still puts us below jurisdictions such as Greenville, Aiken, Conway, North Augusta, who all have fees that are significantly, and those are specifically sanitation fees that are significantly higher. Greenville being the lowest of those at $186 a year. We would be the next at 115, and then Spartanburg right below us at 108. The total annual fees, which includes our stormwater fee as well as our as a proposed $115 sanitation municipal solid waste fee, would position us a couple notches down or up as well between Anderson and Spartanburg, and then you would have Spartanburg, Somerville, Greenville, Aiken, Conway, North Augusta still all ahead of us in regards to the total annual fees that they charge. Perhaps the two graphs that stand out the most are the last two, which is the annual property tax and fees on the median house value. As you will see, we do not change in position at all regarding the comparisons that we have. We're still positioned in the same location between Spartanburg and Aiken, with Anderson, North Augusta, Conway, and Greenville at the top end. And then finally, on the very last page, which is one of the last slides that we always provide council in regards to our municipal comparison, which shows the percent of the median household income that's required to pay those property taxes and fees combined. All the taxes, all the fees. As Mr. Driggers mentioned, the millage is not going up. The recommendation for the change to the sanitation fee, taken into account, still positions us exactly where we were previously at a total of 1.54% of median household income required to pay property taxes and fee, an increase of only 0.03%, or excuse me, an increase of 0.09% because we previously, at the $75, what was that? We had reduced it to negative 0.06, but it still positions Greenwood, Spartanburg, Conway, Greenville, Anderson. Those folks are ahead of us in that, are still above us in that regard.
So we've tried to do our homework. We've tried to look at all areas relative to this. We've spent a lot of time over it over the years with all of us. We know how we got into imposing the original fee. We just believe that the economy of our community, the financial position of the city, is the right time for us to make the shift. Again, the city will we won't, not an extra dollar will come in, nor will an extra dollar go out, but it does shift where it comes from internally. Very similar to reassessment. There's a shift in where those resources, how that is paid. And in this particular case, it shifts to that person that is using the service.
And what determines, I mean, if you've got certain people not using the service, why can't other people?
Well, we think many will, and we think out of the 2,725 that a number of those will opt into our service.
Now, my question is, why can't others opt out?
Why can't they opt out?
Yeah.
Well, I think because then you lose, I think you will have a legitimate position from your contractor that says, now I am losing efficiency of service on the street because I am not picking up all the streets. I think one of the reasons that we would not want to do that is that if they were to opt to go to and I can't imagine why, but if they want to pay double and have someone else pick up their service, then they would be in a position that we have multiple equipment operating on the streets. My experience in doing this in another city and talking with the cities that have the fees, there just isn't another place that allows you to opt out, because what typically happens, a property that will opt out will contribute to other issues, because remember, this is also providing for the recycling, and this is providing for the curbside collection that our contractor provides for us. While they may say, I'll take my garbage to the county convenience center, what we may find is that they're really putting it into their neighbor's can. What they really are doing is taking it somewhere else. They could be illegally dumping. But what we will always find that they'll continue to do is to put materials at the curb, and they'll continue to utilize the recycling services. And so opting out just isn't the best business method to manage that. That would be my position.
If you're a member of one of these communities that that does not get service, can you still bring stuff to the recycling center?
As a city resident, we would not restrict them from doing that.
Even though they're not contributing to that?
Unless you would instruct us otherwise, we would not restrict that.
I think that's an inequality in it.
I mean, it's just because the trash truck is going around and actually picking up the things, taking it to the recycling bin, that can sometimes be a little inconvenience to the party that's doing it.
You don't think any of those people bring stuff to the recycling place?
I'm sure they may do that.
So they'll be getting to do it for free.
Well, we want people to recycle, right? Isn't that true? I mean,
Some
throughout
people
the
do.
nation, is that not something that you even see TV commercials and everything else about recycling?
If you see it
So
on
that's
TV,
something
it
that
ain't
you
necessarily
prevent.
true.
No, it's not, just like the internet.
I mean, to your point, Mr. Bear, I understand your position. I'm just, for the business model and managing the program, I believe and would recommend to council that it would be best that we would not allow a qualified residential property that is qualified to receive the service to opt out of the service. If council chooses and directs otherwise, obviously we will figure out how to do that. It is my recommendation that we would not allow opt-out. That's all I have relative to that fund.
All right. Council, other comments?
Fund 50 is our facilities use fund. That's the reserve for replacement fund, I guess for lack of a better name. David and Ann are probably most familiar with that. Ann's certainly available to answer any questions. But these are when we receive revenue relative to the rental of this facility, the Cannon Center, other facilities that we rent. Those revenues are placed into Fund 50, and then we use those funds for upkeep and maintenance that is relative to the rental. And so we've tried very hard to take things out of here that are more maintenance specific, but and dedicate it more to reserve for replacement of furniture, fixtures, equipment, paint, upkeep of those rented facilities. Ann, David?
Well, I'll address some of the larger numbers here. Not so much the salaries. I'll leave that for David, workers' comp and stuff. But, pretty much we're just standard materials and supplies to have a line item there. For building repairs at City Hall, we're looking at replacing banquet chairs. Some of them are getting to where they just do not look very well and they're not holding up, and it's about that time. It's been about, 9 years? And just really general repairs. Let's see, special contract for City Hall and Cannon Center. Basically, it would be like pest control cleaning. We bring an environment master to clean our facility in addition to when we have rentals. To clean the facilities after those rentals are over. Kids planning expenses, that's just general upkeep for re-oiling the wood, general maintenance. And then Veterans Park, we're looking at for veterans memorials, an option there. And then there's renovation, which is $32,000. We're looking at Cannon Center restrooms. When we actually renovated the Cannon Center, we didn't renovate the restrooms, and the tiles are not in the best shape. We have some that are broken in certain restrooms, and we're looking at replacing those tiles.
You need
And
to look at the air conditioning too. It doesn't keep up in those restroom facilities at all.
it does not keep up.
No.
Recent experience, right?
Paying customer.
That's right.
Okay. But as far as looking at the tile on the floors and walls, plumbing and some countertop work for that facility.
Why is there no revenue for the Veterans Park? Well, I guess there.
Why is there no revenue?
It's free.
Well, there was maybe $5,000.
The revenue that's in there is from a donation from the DAB. And we put it through here so we can in turn go back and put memorials out for veterans who've passed.
So
So-
generally, people don't rent
It's,
that part.
Yeah, the only structure we have is the gazebo.
yeah, so they just use that
Okay.
at their leisure.
Others? Thank you, ma'am.
You're good. Fund 60 is our paving fund. We continue to receive revenue from Greenville County and from Spartanburg County. We are recommending through this budget that we would allocate additional resources you see there at 201,700, allowing us for a total revenue of $400,000. From the expenditure side, we continue to allocate 50,000 of that for sidewalk repair and replacement, 100,000 to be dedicated on the Greenville County side, on the Spartanburg County side, and 250 to Greenville that we would do in the local match program. We have been advised by the Legislative Delegation Transportation Committee that they will again this year have a cap on their match funds. But our available resources would exceed that amount of money, so we would get the maximum available cap, and then the balance of those funds would simply be used for local paving projects that we would do either outside of the CTC, or we would be able to put them on with their project and they use them as well. We have been working with the CTC to get a little information on how we can do some projects outside of the resurfacing program, because that's what they're doing the cap on the match with. So if we can start to do some additional projects, I'm going to ask Miss Albert to go with me to one of their meetings. She can seem to walk in and get $1 million out of those folks, and that's, so she's figured out how to do it. But our commitment to paving stays at the same level. We feel very comfortable with that. We'll match that to the maximum amount allowed through the CTC, and then we will obviously, again, we'll use the match resources from the road fee that is collected by both Greenville and Spartanburg So we know that we'll do a minimum of 400,000 with match probably another 150,000 or so on top of that. Mr. Grant, any additional information that you may have on that? David, good?
Righty.
Okay.
Paved roads.
And you may be at the end of papers over there. We will be recommending to council with first reading to establish a contingency fund. Our contingency fund is called for in our financial policies and procedures that we approved a couple of years ago. You approved a few years ago. We have not been in a position of being able to fund the contingency fund, but it is that which is specific for emergency situations. Our financial policy recommends that it would be funded at 1% of the budget. We would recommend that we would actually exclude a couple of items like transfers would be excluded for that, but it would be funded. So what would happen with that in that fund is that is a transfer from your fund balance to the contingency fund for emergency situations. It's how you use your contingency fund anyway, but it gives you a fund dedicated so that when the auditors are coming in, and if you have that, you're not having to do a budget amendment to allow you to expend those funds for emergency purposes. You have a place to go and use those funds. I think one of the questions asked in the last audit, Mr. Beshew, was like, well, how do we prevent that from happening? That they were talking to us about a transfer that didn't reconcile.
Right.
This is
Right.
what helps us achieve that, so that we don't get that comment from the auditors as well. So we will have that for you for first reading when you're considering that.
Has it got a cap on it?
1%.
I mean, it's 1% every year from now on.
Well, no, we wouldn't add it. I mean, it would maintain itself at 1%. So if we fully fund it, the only thing that it would increase the next year with, let's say the budget increased by 300,000, then 1% of 300,000 would go into the fund.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Correct? Make sure. Yeah. Make sure that we're good on that. The ordinance itself will have some information concerning fees. The only amendment, all of our department have looked at the existing fee structure. If council approves us to move forward with the recommendation on the switch to the municipal solid waste sanitation program, then that one item is what would be adjusted in the fee schedule. That would be the only adjustment to the fee schedule. I want to make you aware, as we are, and Mr. Seifert made reference to it earlier, we are working with CPW on our lighting project for Wade Hampton Boulevard. We currently have resources set aside for Wade Hampton Boulevard. They're set aside in a fund for that purpose. We have evaluated whether or not it is to our advantage to allow CPW to do the installation of that program on Highway 29, or if it would be to our advantage to do that with our own resources. We believe that it would be to our advantage for us to fund that installation. That installation is $2.5 million. We have about $1.2 million available for that project now. We think the balance of about $1.5 million would be bonded under a GO bond. We believe that there is the capacity for that to be paid either over time, or that we would pay that in some type of balloon payment, even as an early payment out of our existing resources. The bottom line is that we can use our own money to do the installation at the exact same cost that they would be doing it, but by using our own money, we're not paying them a fee to finance that, and therefore pay a higher rate for the fixtures than we would be paying just for the lights. So the installation and the equipment, it's just cheaper for us to do it long term with our available resources or the capacity with a GO for that project than it would be for them to finance it. We just think it's.
Did you call Duke Power and see if they'd furnish the power cheaper?
Well, no, no, we didn't. We could, but no, we didn't.
Bet they would. Bet they would.
Actually, they couldn't. Under the agreement that CPW has with Duke Energy, CPW has the rights to that service area because it's inside the city limits. So we would recommend that we do that. We're working on how we would do that relative to a bond. We would be working with our financial advisors and our bond attorney and how we would set that up. We're not making the commitment through the budget to do that. It's just part of what we are planning to do over the next fiscal year. Any other, I'm just trying to think of anything else on that, David? I think that's.
So if we spend all the money out of our emergency fund, heaven forbid, some year, we'll be required by ordinance to replenish the entire thing at 1%?
No. What the ordinance says is that we recommend that we maintain a contingency fund equal to that amount.
Okay.
No, it doesn't require you to do it, because even if we felt that it did, then you would simply make a motion
Pass a new
to
one.
change the ordinance. Exactly. No, it's a policy recommendation to have those resources so that you don't have to do budget amendments if and when that were to occur. It just sets that aside for that purpose. As buildings age, you could have, we had insurance covered it, but we had a chiller system that went out here. It was a $100,000 insurance claim when it was covered. And so those are the types of things that if you were to have that type of an emergency or a major system failure or roof leak or flood or ice storm, those are the dollars you go to first outside of your general operations. And I think the last that I would have, again, in determining how resources are set aside, we know that we have agreed with Greenville County that they will be providing a set aside for us based on a return of millage or a portion of millage that was collected for countywide recreation. We are anticipating that we should receive that sometime June, July. When we do, it's going to be about $335,000 to $350,000. I am recommending to council that we would earmark the receipt of those funds for us to initiate the initial engineering and study and plans relative to the proposed pedestrian and bicycle plan, that we would come back to council, we would decide what we would want to engineer and have documents drawn so that then we have a much firmer idea of the scope of work that we would like to proceed with, if we want to proceed with it, and at what cost. As of right now, it's pretty hypothetical as to what the cost could be. We need construction documents for us to know. We have a demonstration project that we've already let on Brushy Creek Road. Is the engineer completely finished on that? So we've got the demonstration project designed, and our next phase would be to construct that so that we could see how this pedestrian plan could be utilized if we were to implement it moving on. That would then connect downtown to Century Park through the ultimate development of the residential area there to Buncombe Road. And so we start to see how this can start to fit together so that we can connect neighborhoods to downtown and to parks based on that original pedestrian master plan. I think that's it, right? I think that's it. That's it. That's it.
Council, thank you for your time and attention this evening. This harkens back to the early days for some of us. This was kind of standard MO for a budget session. So appreciate your time and attention as we have moved forward in this regard, and to staff. Thank you, staff, for the time that you have put into preparing these documents, and to the many staff meetings that I know that you have had, and individual meetings that you have had to arrive at where we are right now. I think the administrator's comments earlier in the evening that this really is a team approach speaks volumes about who we are and what we do and what we've been able to achieve. And I think that's a real testament to you as department heads and to our entire staff. So thank you. Thank you for not only for what you do, but for the time and detail and understanding that goes into this process every year. I'm looking forward to 2016, 2017. I think we've got a great budget, great opportunity, and lots of things ahead of us. So we appreciate all that you're doing to make this possible. Council, we had talked about the possibility of needing an extra amount of time to work on the budget. I know that you've given some time to digest what you can of this tonight. Is there any feeling among council that we need to schedule another workshop between now and our next meeting?
No mas, no mas.
Obviously, department heads, finance staff, myself, we are available for any questions that you have on the budget. If you do the workshop, we're here to participate in that process, to answer any questions you may have. But obviously, at the 14th of June meeting, it would show as first reading, but again, able to debate or amend any portion of the budget at that time before you would approve first reading as well. So there is plenty of opportunity to discuss and amend, but we want to make sure that you have all the information that you need, and we are available to schedule that workshop if council desires to.
Well, it would appear we may not need it or don't need it at this point, but if that changes, we'll certainly let you know. Otherwise, let's go ahead and plan on first reading then on the 14th. We'll place it on the agenda. Council, anything else we need to consider tonight? If not, I'll call the workshop to a close.